One by one, Gloria answered monosyllabically. "It's not your turn. It's that girl with the mop. She's young. It's not hard for her. And she's not pregnant, by the way. Why do you pay her money if she's got it all on her own? Scrubbing like hell. No, I'm gonna give her a kick in the ass so she's out to here. I'll give you another kick to shut her up," Gloria wanted to say, but she kept silent like a partisan under interrogation. Her patience had run out suddenly. The only automatic washing machine in the apartment belonged to Gloria. She had rushed to buy it, and it had taken the best place in the bathroom. No other machine would fit there now. Whether Sandra and Mary washed their clothes in basins or in the laundry room was of no interest to Gloria, and it certainly wouldn't have occurred to any of her neighbors to ask permission to do their laundry in someone else's machine. So the pile of laundry that appeared on the washing machine was not doubtful of its belonging. Besides, Gloria had seen that yellow sweater on her mother-in-law, and the pantaloons were clearly hers too. It would seem that take 2 fingers, stick them in the machine, pour the powder, turn on the program, and that's it. It's the husband's mother. She's leaving in 2 days. But Gloria felt a 9th wave of irritation, even hatred. She did not want to touch this old woman's clothes, to take them in her hands, to inhale the odor of her dirty body. She wanted to get even somehow for a week of living with her mouth closed, with her mouth taped shut and unable to say what she thought. She shoved the old woman's clothes into the dirtiest corner of the tub with her foot and stomped on them. She put her bedding in the machine. Before her husband came, she hung up snow-white sheets and duvet covers, fragrant with perfume. My mother-in-law saw that her goods were left unwashed. She went to the bathroom to check. When she came back, her lips were pressed together. When Vincent arrived, Gloria was supposed to serve dinner. But she hesitated. She wanted to walk quietly out of the kitchen, to go to the door and hear what her grandmother was saying. Gloria had no doubt that she would complain. But she'd underestimated Amber's outrage. She didn't even want to hide. When Gloria set a plate of cutlets and mashed potatoes in front of each of them, her mother-in-law asked, her chin upturned, addressing only her son, as if her daughter-in-law weren't even here. "Why didn't your wife wash my clothes?" Vincent was hungry and didn't feel like arguing. "She must be tired," he said diplomatically, wielding his fork.
She lies on the bed all day. His mother-in-law wanted to summarize the week's observations, and she spits at the ceiling. And it's hard for her to start the laundry. Why?
That's where Gloria went off on a tangent. "Because I'm not a laundress," she said with a smile that could outshine the sun. So much of it was fiery hatred. "Because your son and you live in my house, and if you expect it, someone else can please you, but not me." The mother-in-law gasped with indignation and the urge to reply. Her jaws set, and then one of them moved out of its usual place. My mother-in-law had the cheapest prosthesis made at the district hospital, and it couldn't take the emotion. I had to run to the bathroom to fix it. It was an added humiliation. Gloria went out to calm down and make tea. When she returned, Vincent was helping his mother pack. There wasn't much. His mother-in-law had brought the goodies in large bags, her own clothes in one small one. The dirty laundry was put in a bag. "Where are you going?" Gloria asked, emphasizing the you. She wasn't interested in where her mother-in-law was going. And to an acquaintance, Vincent answered dryly. He'd taken his mother away and hadn't come home for the night. But Gloria knew it was only temporary. Where would he go? A stamp in his passport, a roof over his head, and a sun on the horizon. He'll come back like a sweetheart. He'll only stay with the old woman until he puts her on the train to show her he's with her. And then he'll come. Sandra and Mary hardly noticed that a stranger was living in the apartment. They had been drawn into their rooms before, like a snail drawn into its shell. The loud-voiced, perpetually disgruntled Gloria filled all the space in the apartment, and they didn't want to cross paths with her. Sandra sat on the bed, stroking Sergo, covered with a plaid blanket, scratching his neck. But her thoughts wandered far away. She realized that such an incident as a suicide attempt in a single house was unlikely to make it to the major news sites. So now she just went from one social network to another, scrolling through community news, looking a day, 2, 3 ahead. She realized that this work could be endless and even fruitless, and it was even more likely that that was the case. But what a strange feeling it was to learn what no one else knew. It's hard to be God, and even to carry a tiny spark to be a visionary is also very hard. You can see who will win a soccer match, which politician will have a career crash. But Sandra was not interested in any of that. Suddenly she flinched and blinked a lot. She had this habit of blinking, as if everything unpleasant would dissipate by itself, if only she blinked and then took a closer look. Going home today. She read on the forum, the first hour of the night I see, and we in the yard ambulance stands. A girl is taken out. Her head was smashed. Her hair was in crow V. They took her out so quickly. I wanted to come up and ask what happened, but they loaded her right away and drove away, with flashers. Underneath the message was a photo, apparently taken hastily on a phone. Sandra blinked one last time. Nothing had changed. It was their driveway, familiar graffiti. And on the stretcher, yes, it looked like it was her. She was covered with something, but that bloody hair. Can fate be changed? Or will it still lead you to the snake, like Oleg the prophet? Try to climb or fold your paws on your chest, let it be as it will be.
Sandra glanced at the date. It would happen in 5 days.
So she only had 5 days. You know the day, the hour and the place when it's going to happen to you. So you go somewhere quiet and wait it out. Then come back. There was a place to go. I could ask one of my single friends to spend the night. And her aunt wouldn't kick her out if it was just for one night. You can come up with a convincing version for everyone at home: problems with water, gas, electricity. Neighbors are renovating. She's sick from the smell of paint. There's plenty of options to choose from. So why was Sandra being held back? Sergo. He won't be welcome, but Mary can look after him for 24 hours. They love each other. So what? Is this the butterfly from Ray Bradbury's story? You can't interfere with what's programmed by fate. An accidentally squashed butterfly can change the course of history. The easiest thing to do is not to believe everything that has happened in the last few days. All the phone can do is Gloria's mother. Sandra will be supported in this by everyone except Chris. But assuming that the prediction is true, it is unbearable to wait for trouble and do nothing. Sandra had 2 things planned for herself at once: to go to her brother's house and to talk to Chris. With August, they had a big age difference. His brother is 12, and of course he considers himself an adult, and he's angry that everything was decided for him at the time. I don't want to live with my aunt, he said at the time. Sandra was a mess, half blind from crying and confused as a child. Why like? She was an 18-year-old child, her mother's daughter, her favorite, a first-year student. It seemed to her that with the death of her parents, everything was over for her. Why didn't they take her with them? Why didn't she go with them in that car? Because she didn't like the dacha, and Dad and Mom were supposed to pick berries. There's a lot of strawberries at the cottage. Aunt Nelsie. She cried and wore black, but she never missed a detail. She made all the arrangements at the funeral home and the canteen, ordered a memorial dinner and pies. She was just as quick to make arrangements for housing. The brother and sister clung to each other, the last 2 pieces of the broken family, but the aunt said, "Sorry, Sandra, you're almost an adult. I'm not taking you in. You'll get married tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, a young family, children. It's hard for me to get involved in all that. I'll get custody of August. What are you going to do with him on your shoulders now? What do you have besides your scholarship? Study hard, get on your feet, and your brother will grow up with me. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I won't hurt you. We'll divide the apartment now. In fairness, you'll have your own place." August held Sandra's hand all this time, as if he hoped that she would interfere with this plan, and they would both remain living in their home as before, except that the parents' bedroom would be empty. But Sandra realized that if she didn't let her emotions overwhelm her soul, take over her aunt was right. Sandra's greatest fear was that, busy with studying and practicing, she would miss her brother. He would drop out of school, get involved with some backyard company, and she, the sister, would notice everything too late. God forbid the boys will rob some late passerby or break into a kiosk at night, or even get addicted to drugs. Then her parents will curse her from beyond the grave for not watching out. She's the big sister, so it's her fault. Aunt Nelsie worked as an accountant in the district office, although she had no children of her own, but she was no stranger to the educational process. August, then still very young, could not decide anything on his own. But the fact that his sister yielded to his aunt, he took it as a betrayal. And for a long time after that, he didn't want to talk to Sandra when she came to visit. Only lately he had softened a little, and there was something like the old relationship between them. Now Sandra didn't want to go up to her aunt's apartment. She called her brother and summoned him to the yard. Sandra saw him as he came out of the driveway and couldn't take her eyes off him. It was clear that August would grow up to be a handsome boy, but the main thing was that he looked so much like his mother. It is believed that boys resemble their mothers and girls resemble their fathers. Now Sandra and August see in each other a reflection of their parents, who are no longer there. "What are you doing?" August asked, approaching. Sandra arrived at a bad hour. Usually she visited her brother on weekends, but today was Wednesday. At other times Sandra would have joked about it, made up some reason, but today she allowed herself to be truthful. "I just missed you," she said. "I don't have anyone else but you." "I'm the one who doesn't." August, that 12-year-old boy, had never spoken so earnestly. "You've got some bastard. You have or you'll have. You'll have kids of your own. And me. My aunt can't wait for me to finish 9th grade and slip away to some college. And that's it. She's free. And me? The army. Then the rest of my life. Maybe then, when I'm done serving and send my aunt to hell, I won't be alone. But for now." To Avgut's amazement, his sister hugged him tightly. She wanted to hold his head against her chest, but he was already taller than her. They bumped foreheads. "August, I'm sorry," said Sandra. "I love you anyway. You know that." "What are you doing here?" He called her back, as Sandra was hurrying away and seemed to be wiping her eyes with the palms of her hands. She just waved her hand, "Leave me alone," trying hard not to burst into tears in front of him. It was a hell of a thing. Everyone had agreed to finish her off, both her husband and her own relatives. Gloria put down the phone and laughed, the kind of laugh that makes people around you run for sedatives or even a straitjacket. Her father had just shocked her with the news. Her grandmother is coming to Pennsylvania to visit her. The old woman used to have her own apartment in the winter and a cottage in the summer. She had been told that sooner or later the hour would come when she would have to recognize her age and move in with her relatives or move into a nursing home. But it was like a thunderstorm that the weather forecasters promise in 3 days. Would it blow over? Or maybe she would feel tolerable to the end and go to God from her native walls. Now she sat at her daughter and son-in-law's house, in a house she considered a stranger, and to which she could not get used. Gloria received a call from her father. His voice was guilty. "Grandma wants to come to see you," he said. Gloria was dumbfounded. "Why?" "She raised you, her favorite granddaughter. And you haven't even asked about her in so long. She says, 'Gloria's forgotten all about me. You're not coming to our house, are you?' Well, maybe Grandma is. On the one hand, to shake things up, because all her friends are still where she used to live. And on the other hand, to say goodbye. It's already old. No matter how life will turn out, maybe you won't see each other again." Gloria imagined it. Grandma always needs to know everything. Where did she go? Why? When will you be back? And why so late? It's better not to go, but to call. What did you buy? What are you going to cook? I don't want that. Cook me this. Gloria would turn into both a little child who had to report every move and a servant whom Grandma Lucia would lord it over. For a moment, Gloria really felt the same, the youngest in the family, who could not even think of refusing the elders. The screen door was bought so she could give her grandmother a corner. Vincent would be back. He didn't know the old woman anything. Gloria imagined the look on his face when he found out his wife had kicked his mother out to take in her grandmother. Why should they, the young, who were still programmed by nature to live, have to adjust themselves to someone whose age was up? "No way," Gloria said to her father. "Explain to Grandma that I have no place to take her. Let her not even think about it. At her age, it's a hard road and expenses, and I don't even have a free corner." And from resentment at life, and at her relatives, who do not understand anything, and take on her one problem after another, she cried directly into the telephone receiver. "You're mocking me, aren't you? Are you all making water over me? Why don't you feel sorry for me? Send Grandma to Lexi's in London. She'll probably have more fun there than in my fucking commune." And not listening to what her father was saying to her, she cut the conversation short, and then sobbed for a long time in her room, falling flat on her bed. She felt like the whole world was against her. Before going to Chris's, Sandra had to take Sergo for a walk. The pig had a special harness made to order for walking, but it was impossible to find a collar for his thick neck. The pig was walking in a businesslike manner, not noticing anyone around him. He was interested in one thing: what he could eat on the way. He tasted everything, depending on the season. Autumn leaves, so leaves, snow, snow. Sergo did not look at anyone, but passers-by invariably looked at him. Children wondered who was that. Adults explained a piglet. And in their eyes there was confusion. Do I really see it? As alarmed as Sandra was, she was amused by the girl who folded her arms reverently on her chest. This is the first pig in my life. Wait, there will be many more, the mother promised, pulling her daughter along with her. Finally, Sergo was walked and locked in the room. Sandra gave the key to Mary. In case the pig wakes up and starts yelling, he can be fed. Food is in the locker. We'll have a wonderful time, Mary promised. I'll read him some poetry. Go about your business in peace, child. When Sandra called Chris and asked for a meeting, she said she wanted to see him on neutral territory, somewhere in a cafe or a bar. I can't take it. My hands shouldn't be shaking. A jeweler needs precise movements. And my fingers are shaking with fear like the last Al-Kash. And if that's the case, I want to get drunk. I need someone sober to keep an eye on this, and then send me home. Can you do that? No. We'll deliver, Chris replied, and Sandra nodded in satisfaction, even though she couldn't see him at the moment. And now they were sitting at a table in a small cafe, a kind of glass on the 7 winds, and Sandra, even before the conversation between them, 3 big gulps of cognac. Now I will let go, probably, she said, inside as if everything is knotted. You know, detectives, it's not my thing. Not my genre. Absolutely not. We're more of a thriller. Chris pulled a small netbook out of his bag, opened it, and the homepage of the internet loaded very quickly. But Chris only grumbled annoyingly and opened another file. Sandra wanted to bend over the table to him, but he had moved his chair and was now sitting next to her. The girl saw a map of Pennsylvania, labeled with some icons. These, Chris said, the cases I know, the ones I told you about. Why are there 2 or 3 on some houses? Because there have been a number of failed suicides there. I put the dates next to them when they happened. Sandra made a wish. If this virtual map doesn't show her yard, or the guy who was carried out on a stretcher, she saw it with her own eyes, then it's all bullshit and empty fears. She found her yard on the map. There was a cross painted on the neighboring house, and the date was the same date. Maybe the phone will tell you something. Chris looked up at her, anyway. There's a cross on your house too, see? Do you mind if I find out more about the history of your commune? Dig into its past, who lived there before you, whether people have been taken from it. Sandra nodded, pondering whether or not to tell him that the phone had predicted her fateful date. Instead, she began to drink cognac shot after shot. Maybe when everything swam in front of her eyes, she'd be brave enough to tell him. Chris kept his promise. Calling a cab, supporting her by the shoulders, he took Sandra to the car and sat in the back seat with her. Are you with me? She sounded surprised, her voice unsteady. To be honest, she didn't manage to say it at all the first time. There must be someone to help you up the stairs. They said goodbye at the door of her apartment. Mary was still awake. Apparently she had invited the pig to a fun party. Sandra heard the old lady's voice and a satisfied grunt in response. When Sandra entered, Mary was sitting in a chair with a bag of cookies and Sergo was at her feet impatiently waiting for the next batch of treats. But that wasn't what caught Sandra's attention. The antique closet that stood by the door was ajar, and there were a number of things hanging on the shoulders, and among them, 2 white medical gowns. Tomorrow. That was the first thought that had crossed Sandra's mind when she woke up. Everything will happen tomorrow. Or would it? But now she could feel it subconsciously with her spine. It would. The air was electrified, as if before a thunderstorm. It was crackling. The pig that lay at her feet snorted in his sleep. He slept like a cat on his back, hooves up. Sergo hoped for a quiet morning and pancakes. Sandra often baked him pancakes, and if he was lucky, with a banana. Bananas were the pig's favorite thing in the world. Sandra stroked his belly with 2 fingers, careful not to wake him. She could read his thoughts even in his sleep. You mustn't eat so much, she said softly. You'll be like Esther. Do you know about her? Her owners took her in as a little piglet, thinking she was a thoroughbred and would be 2 peas in a pod. But she grew up to be a big horse. I mean pork. I was going to say pig. At that moment, she almost envied Sergo to the point of tears. She too wanted to think about pancakes and bananas, about beads and panties, about a snow-white beach and a warm sea where she had been several times in her distant childhood. But instead, you have to figure out how exactly you're going to be killed. Why this question did not arise, it was already seen. And yesterday when they had talked to Chris, they too each of them knew why. They're young. The body works like clockwork. And every part of it costs money. A lot of money. And it's so tempting to catch a man in your web like a spider to a fly that no one will be looking for him. Sandra took out her cell phone. She put it under her mattress at night in the same place, so that even in the dark it could be fumbled for it at any second. Maybe she hoped that by sheer force of will she would hypnotize the future, change it. Sandra also knew that today was the last time she would see this forum page, this picture. The cell phone showed only the future, but not today. And so she looked at the photo with triple attention. Who was lying on the stretcher, her or Gloria? Both had wavy, shoulder-length hair. The face of the woman on the stretcher was turned away from the viewer, and the blood ... guess which one it was. The orderlies are not even visible in the darkness, just white coats. Gloria was arguing in the kitchen. Sandra listened and realized that the faucet was leaking and there was a puddle on the floor. It was good that Gloria noticed in time, otherwise the downstairs neighbors would have come to beat them up. Or, at the very least, they would have made them make repairs. Gloria opened the door without knocking, peeked in.
I called a locksmith. He won't be here until tomorrow. No dishes in the kitchen, only in the bathroom.
She had that tone again of the landlady who owns the whole apartment. Then she reached Mary and repeated the same information to her. Sandra wasn't going to eat breakfast at all. She couldn't eat a bite. Sergo had dry food, enough for one day. God, she'd have to think about where to put him if. None of her friends would take him, except Chris. He seems like a responsible guy. At the very least, he'll put Sergo in the care of a society for orphaned pigs. I think I'm going on a wine diet, Sandra muttered, pouring herself a full glass of Spanish red. The bottle had been in her locker for a long time, intended for her birthday. But what now? Chris called as Sandra reached to pour herself a second glass. I found out something else, he said. Interesting. Well, Sandra hurried on. Let's meet. Not like yesterday. There's no time for emotions. You have to listen to me, understand and remember everything. Sandra realized he does not want her to cry into his vest, does not want to see her like the day before drunk. Such things are reported sober. And I'm already, she said, I mean everything. I'm stoned. They met in the park. Sergo, whose memory was no worse than that of a dog, immediately grunted unpleasantly, pissing out tone. He hoped that Chris, like an old acquaintance, had brought him something tasty. At first Chris waved his hands guiltily, but then he fumbled in his pocket for a candy, which Sergo ate with delight. They walked slowly down the alley, and Sandra was not interested in those who looked back at the pig. In general, in your room before this drunkard, lived a young guy, said Chris. Not for a long time, less than a year. Can you guess what happened to him? Sandra held her breath. And it got bad for him. But when he was taken out of the apartment by the paramedics, this fellow looked pretty decent. Only on the stretcher lay very pale and completely out of it. Our new acquaintance is, after all, a lot of fun. They come up with different ways of suicide. The orderlies in the yard said the kid had taken some pills. I don't believe that, more likely some kind of quick-acting injection. One thing I do know is your favorite old lady was home at the time. She opened the door for them. They probably changed clothes at her place, Sandra said thoughtfully. And in the other houses, the ones on my map, it's the same story there too. After the young people left, someone temporary would move into the rooms. Someone who wouldn't last long. An old dandelion, an alcoholic, that sort of thing. It was a kind of padding, so as not to attract attention. So that no one would wonder what kind of unhappy apartment it was, huh? That suicides in it one after another. And here God's dandelion went out into the world quite peacefully, according to all the rules, and the funeral was with a wake. Can someone help us? For Sandra, that was the question that decided her fate. Well, I mean, do we have enough evidence to go to the police with all this? Are you kidding me? And don't look at me hopeful. I don't have an investigator I know, a sensitive investigator who's going to get in there and bust this whole system. Because it's a system, I'm sure of it. So that's it, Sandra summed up, lowering her head. Even if she moves out now, we'll rent a place somewhere else. Just tell me on what the system will only stop for a little bit. And then the spider will weave its web, and someone else will go to dismantle. I don't know any operative, said Chris, but I know a gangster. True, in the past. But that, as they say, is not forgotten. You never forget. You could wait. Watch. To gather facts, but you can't tomorrow. I have to save you. And yes, tomorrow you won't leave the house, as someone is probably watching. Whether you're in or out, it's probably your Mary spying. Oh, she's a tricky old lady. If, as you say, she's lived here all her life, she's seen a lot of things. I'm sure there was more than just this guy who was taken away, and before him. I haven't dug deep enough.
The city polyclinic was a nightmare. No, do not imagine an ancient building, crumbling plaster and corridors in which you can shoot horror movies. If the age of the polyclinic is measured in human years, this child was just about to go to school. But the number of doctors here was barely a third of the required number, and in front of each office where the reception was taking place, a queue was forming. The most aggressive of those with coupons were ready to go into hand-to-hand combat on those who wanted to just ask, and the nurse, who now and then came out of the office to give patients this or that paper, did it with caution. Crowds were rushing through the ajar door. The oldest of the doctors who could still stand the work of a district doctor was Laurel, who had recently turned 85. The youngest was Kat, 2 years out of medical school. Isabella occupied an intermediate position. She was a little over 30, experienced and still strong enough. That's the kind of person you'd normally work for. But Isabella had a special position. She had a powerful sister who was hated by the whole town. She could push the right buttons when she wanted to. Their parents had once pranked, as the young women would say with a chuckle, by naming their daughters Isabella and Izzy. Both grew up rare beauties. Both devoted their lives to natural sciences. Except that Izzy was very happily married, to a policeman of such rank that if she had been threatened, not by every second, but by every first citizen, she would have felt perfectly safe. Izzy was a veterinarian, but she didn't treat the lesser brothers in some clinic. She ran a shelter where dogs were taken in after being caught on city streets and in backyards. How this system worked is a separate song. Izzy's guys didn't target the biggest and fiercest dogs. They went after pets. Even dogs that were out walking with their owners got into the van. Pekingese not wearing a muzzle? They would snatch it out of their hands and throw it into Margot. And the only way to get the pet back was to pay a fine, which for old ladies amounted to about half of their pension. And you were lucky if you got the dog alive. Although it was believed that the fines went to the maintenance of dogs, people have learned by bitter experience, if you do not take your pet right now, tomorrow he may be sick. And the day after tomorrow, and the day after that, and even, as it is customary to say among animal rights activists, to go to the rainbow. A week later, the animals that survived in this dog concentration camp returned exhausted, unable to drink from puddles on the way. Some were dying at home. The owners who tried to sue were convinced that even their Izzy, thanks to her husband, had everything covered, and not once did the Black Queen get any trouble from the court. Someone said, "God is not afraid of her. Old man's tears will come back to her, that boomerang will fly." But the boomerang was obviously delayed. The sisters saw each other rarely, because Isabella's life was quite different. Her husband is a scientist chemist, a university teacher. The salary is not penniless, but not cosmic either. Isabella herself is a district therapist, and no one could say about her that she is unscrupulous in her work or does not know her job, and she never allowed herself to be rude to people, as well as did not let herself sit on her neck. Small stature, very pretty, lush hair gathered in a knot, on slender legs, graceful shoes. Men, even very old ones, looked at the doctor with pleasure. Every time a new patient entered the office, he saw Isabella writing. All information concerning the previous patient must be entered on the right pages. The ward manager was a real piece of work. If we were a slave system and she was allowed to do it, Tina would be walking around with a whip and beating us all, young Kat said one day. And she wasn't far from the truth. Theoretically, if you didn't prescribe the right medication, the consequences could be less than if you didn't fill out the right paperwork. So Isabella didn't look at the person slumped in the chair in front of her right away. The nurse habitually reminded her that the stranger was fumbling with her purse. "Can she come out?" sounded a squeezed voice. There was a pause for a few moments. Isabella was finishing the last lines of the card of the patient she had just examined, and at the same time she began to realize that something was going wrong. She raised her head. There was a girl about 24 to 26 sitting in front of her. She might have been younger, but she was stately, well-built, and her braid was arranged around her head, as no one wore it now. "May she come out?" The girl asked again, nodding at the nurse. The medics looked at each other. This was the first time such a thing had happened in their memory. Even the older nurse didn't remember such a thing. "Don't make your own rules," Isabella advised. "Give me your card and tell me what happened to you." "I'm pregnant with your husband's child." The nurse covered her mouth with her palm, suppressing the ouch that was coming out. "I'll go to the registrar's office and look for," she said, and without adding what she was looking for, slipped out of the office. Isabella dropped her pen and laughed to her own amazement. Later she would try to analyze why she had reacted the way she had. Didn't believe the girl, but why? Isabella was extremely busy, like every doctor, who often has to replace, combine, pulling for herself and for that guy, for that sister. For 14 sites in their polyclinic they had 8 district doctors. And even after an endless working day, acquaintances and acquaintances of acquaintances of acquaintances and distant relatives of those very acquaintances did not hesitate to call round the clock. At midnight Isabella put her cell phone on Do Not Disturb mode, but in the morning she often saw missed calls. When it comes to their own health, many people trust not an ambulance, but a competent doctor they know, and it is assumed that he should always be in touch. Anyway, by late afternoon Isabella was usually exhausted. Pete taught at the institute, spent little physical strength. They remained, as they say, in it, and below the belt nature demanded its own. There were students around. So even if the maiden was right, there was nothing incredible in it. On the other hand, Isabella was not even 100, not even 200% sure that Pete would not leave the family. Although they had no children and could not have any, nature had not given Isabella such a chance, but in everything else husband and wife suited each other perfectly. By the look in their eyes, by the movement of an eyebrow, one knew what the other was thinking. They adored their home, which they chose and furnished with such love, especially the husband. For Pete it mattered even what kind of handles on the doors, what shade they were. In addition, he was a hypochondriac. In every pimple he saw cancer, in every cough a deadly disease, and only Isabella could dispel his fears and relieve him of mental anguish. "I take it you are his student," said Isabella, "since he has not left me for you. Why are you sitting here like a beggar? Do you want me to tie Pete up with a red ribbon and send him to you as a present?" "There are no such fools nowadays. The only way you could come to me is if you are starving and you don't have enough for bread." She took a purse out of her purse, pulled out 50 rubles, and squeamishly slid it to the maiden. "Enough for a loaf. If you go hungry again, come and get the same amount. Kind-heartedly. And then, if you want to give birth to this child, after the maternity hospital go somewhere to work, don't beg. Nobody owes you anything." "You don't understand," whispered the girl. "What don't I understand?" Isabella asked mockingly. "That's it. I can't give you any more time. I'm in line." There was indeed someone in the office. The girl had to get out, having missed the nurse in the doorway, and Frances quickly slipped back to her seat. For the rest of the day, however, it was noticeable that her curiosity was piqued, and she would have given much to question Isabella, or at least to notice her worries and sympathize with her. What could be more interesting? There was no doubt about it. Tomorrow morning half the clinic would know about it, in the evening the other half, and the day after that the whole central city hospital. Isabella sighed, as if preparing for battle, and thought that the girl would probably make herself known more than once. Probably, if she did decide to have a baby, she'd have to be frightened into not blackmailing her for child support. Who in this case is better to puzzle, as they used to say, cops or gangsters? Isabella knew people who knew both. She was right, however, to a greater extent than she had imagined. When Isabella was leaving the clinic at the end of her workday, she was on her second shift. She was touched on the sleeve. A girl, tearful, wearing a bunched-up handkerchief. "I'm begging you. I really need to talk to you." Isabella snatched her hand away. You'll tell me that Pete forced you, that you're an innocent victim. You're to be pitied, aren't you? Oh, don't be ridiculous. Listen, said the maiden, and there was something in her tone. Isabella had dealt with a great many people, but this girl sounded like she was about 30 years older than she really was, like she was even older than Isabella herself. I'm poisoned, she said. You can't see it, but it's the poison ... right away ... I don't know how long ... maybe a week, maybe less ... Pete didn't succeed in what he had in mind. Now he thinks it all has to end ... and the baby and me ... I don't need Pete, God forbid ... She was definitely afraid of the word God. I'm here for something else. The girl was ready to kneel. I'm here for the address. Get out, Isabella said through gritted teeth. What nonsense. Look at yourself in the mirror, a healthy horse. Give her an address. A board is made in every medical center. She touched Margot from her seat and saw that the girl was following her. The handkerchief had already fallen from her head. Her steps were so unsteady that the girl had drunk a lot. Her hand was clasped to her breast, her face tear-stained, and damn it, she looked like a penitent Magdalene to Isabella. Then there was a turn, and the maiden disappeared behind it. When Isabella opened the door to her apartment, where even the air was familiar to her, no, all that had happened did not seem like a bad dream to her. But the pain that, as she now realized, had tormented her after the girl's words, that pain on the edge of mental and physical, had grown quieter. Pete was sitting at his computer, and judging by the number of books lying beside him, judging by his hunched back and the empty cups with dried coffee stains, he'd been working for a long time. Hungry, Isabella thought. There was food in the refrigerator, but Pete was like a child, never taking it out, never heating it up. It didn't irritate Isabella. Pete and the unbelievably fat neutered cat Silver were the ones she loved, who depended on her. Our family. She always made 3 days' worth of dinner. Never grabbed convenience foods off the shelf at the store. Better to stand at the stove a little longer, but when the cutlets smell good all over the house, that's happiness. Still, at dinner, though Isabella braced herself, she couldn't help but ask. Your girlfriend came to see me today. Probably a student. Said she's pregnant with your baby. Anything you want to tell me? He frowned, shifting his thoughts from where he'd been hovering to here. At this table, to the borscht and Isabella, and what she'd said. What girl? Like this one, she moved her hand to draw a braid around her head. If there were collective farms now, I'd say she was from there. I don't remember them, Pete confessed. 3/4 of them are knuckleheads. Then they go begging to get a B on the test. They can't buy cigarettes without a scholarship. He ignored the pregnancy and all that. Perhaps the topic he was working on now was particularly interesting. On days like this, he forgot what his own name was. 3 days later, on Sunday, Isabella was on duty. Hour after hour passed, but all was quiet. A small child with a high fever, she sent to another hospital, examined an old lady with high blood pressure, and another with a cough. Then Dan called her from therapy and called her for a consult. He was an excellent cardiologist. He could give anyone 100 points for himself, so it wasn't about her heart. Isabella did not immediately recognize the young woman on the bed as the insolent girl who had escorted her to Margot. It was the first time she had ever seen such a deathly pallor, the face chalky. And when Isabella touched her patient's hand, it was ice cold. I have no idea, Dan said quietly. I don't know what to make of it. The numbers are just crashing. What do you think? No, it wouldn't occur to anyone right now to say that the girl was faking it, playing sick. She was leaving, and she was leaving in front of them. She's pregnant, Isabella said. Transfer her to gynecology, and from there, probably to the area. Dan swallowed the question. How did Isabella know that? Went to make the call. Isabella was left alone with the dying woman. Her gaze, which before had seemed cloudy, detached, now stopped on Isabella. The address. I asked for the address. Pete's brother. He's a toxicologist. But he's in India right now, Isabella blurted out. Will ... Get the young woman spoke with great difficulty, rustling, maybe ... in time ... tell. Her voice became completely inaudible. If you were not in such a state, I would say that you need to go to psychiatry. Even Isabella's praised patience was not enough. My husband's brother we haven't seen for 100 years. He's an archaeologist. He has nothing to do with. Isabella faltered. The young woman was staring past her, pupils dilated, seemingly struggling to breathe. And at any moment that strength might run out. Dan entered swiftly. Heavy and clumsy, he literally flew if there was a heavy patient in the ward. They'll come for her from the region. It doesn't make any sense to move her from unit to unit. I've called the gynecologist. He'll check her out first. How did she get to you? Isabella spoke softly so the patient wouldn't hear. Though if she did hear something, I don't think she realized it. Yes, it's very strange. Dan Margot clung to the foot of the bed. He was so big that he filled the whole room. It wasn't on me. She came in and asked to be admitted. No referral, no ambulance. We showed her through the window. The girl said, "Here's the ambulance building. Go there if you're not feeling well. You will have your blood pressure measured there. They will give you a shot. We don't take it like this." So she kind of left, and everybody forgot about her. And then the nurse came in from surgery and asked, "Do you know that there's a girl lying on your porch? And she's already like this, and you know that I can't lift heavy things with my back." And here I was moving her on a gurney, because there's no one else. She's a big girl. And she's a big girl. But did she complain about anything? Not to me, no. She didn't really talk. This afternoon she was talking some bullshit about poisoning. Is that possible? Isabella asked tiredly. If it's possible, it's the first time I've ever seen it. It's not like she's a drug addict to have overdosed. Thinking food, some kind of mushroom, it doesn't sound like it at all. Isabella, why are we so fated to be together, huh? You're an internist. I'm a cardiologist. Why are we plugging all the holes here? And for pediatricians, and for ophthalmologists in case of need. And these are the kind of girls we get. And what happens if you and I get sick, eh? Usually, especially in front of strangers, they were you, but in such moments and you was acceptable. And what is her name? Where is she from? Isabella inquired. She had her purse with her. Thank God. Queen Anastasia, 25 years old. Anastasia? The doctor raised her eyebrows. And this Anastasia came from Boston. You know, there are 2 villages over there. Even the country people don't go there. There's nothing to see there. I only know that one crazed woman tried to keep an ostrich farm there. And I think there was some kind of center for drug addicts or alcoholics, you know, from the latest and most fucked up ones who couldn't get treatment in the city. It was simple, isolation, occupational therapy, someone like a priest. But not orthodox, but rather a sect. We lived in a barrack. Here she is from this small village. Then the old gynecologist came, and Isabella could leave with a clear conscience. But she went to see the patient once more. It was too absurd a story. Pete did not like to leave the city. Even during vacations, home and institute were the 2 harbors between which the ship of his life ran, and everything else did not interest him at all. Unless he was called somewhere to give a lecture. But try to lure him out at least to the store. Isabella knew what a difficult task that was. And then there's this girl from God-forsaken village who claims that Pete didn't just get her pregnant, but that he poisoned her. He was the one whose worst sin was that he'd once stepped on a kitten's tail by accident. Isabella leaned over the patient. "You will be taken to the regional hospital now," she said, trying to pronounce the words slowly and clearly. "They will help you there. But please answer all the questions truthfully and don't make up anything. If you want to be rescued, don't make things up anymore. Find Rams. He will tell you it was no longer a whisper, but a murmur." The patient closed her eyes. Now her face wore that expression of deep calmness, of detachment, which is so seldom seen in the living, and so often in some sad salons. Isabella's duty was over, but all the way home she could not get the story out of her mind. And who in her place could? There were 2 brothers, Pete being the oldest. When the second was born, her mother wanted to name him Peter, but her father was genuinely surprised. "You're not religious at all. Why should I be?" The boys would grow up, and anyone who heard their names next to each other would think we were Orthodox. The youngest became Alfred, and I must say, it would be difficult to find such different brothers. The older one is tall, slow, immersed in books since childhood, a typical nerd, and the younger, a small, blonde-haired boy who was always given less years than he really was. Alfred became his father's eternal companion and his equally faithful assistant. If his mother left the men to their own devices, Pete didn't even notice. He would hide in his room and immerse himself in books. Does it matter what you chew? Empty bread was fine. His father tried to feed the boys, making a strange soup without meat, but with flour, a kind of murky bread. Alfred, furrowing his brow, was carefully cutting onions, frying them so that they became golden and transparent. And if you added dumplings, the soup could probably be eaten. When his mother returned, she went back to the stove. Alfred followed his father to the garage, gave him tools, and during short smoke breaks, enjoyed real manly conversations his father told him about his childhood, about places he had visited. They made plans together. His father worked at a factory as an ordinary engineer, but since childhood he had been interested in history. Once a teacher gave him a piece of advice. If you love something, don't make it your profession. If the hobby turns into an obligation, the light in your soul goes out. My father was interested in news related to his favorite science, contacted professionals. He had a lot of friends, archaeologists, and in the summer, there was no better vacation for him than to go with his new friends to the excavations. Almost always Alfred accompanied him. Whether it was El Paso or the banks of the Huron or faraway Tucson, how many times they traveled together. Mother was not interested in any of this. In summer, she was eager to go to the country house. She grew tomatoes, huge tomatoes that could not be held in the palms of her hands, roses that smelled so fragrant that people passing by their plot stopped. A marvel for everyone. Mother could not understand how it was possible to leave her own, requiring care, and go to someone else's, unexplored. And then she could not understand how the father could fall in love with a girl Natasha, met in one of the expeditions, and betray the family. Mother was a maximalist. She cut off at once all the threads that bound her to her husband. She didn't want anything from her father. The only thing she wanted, let him forever go to his Natasha and no longer gives about himself. The father wanted, if I may say so, to divide the children. He was ready to leave their mother everything, not even to take a suitcase with him, but to have Alfred go with him. Mother said no. Never, over my dead body. The only thing she agreed to, because the father had not had his parental rights terminated and the mother understood that any court would be on his side, was for Alfred to spend summer vacations with his father. For some reason, neither parent even talked about their eldest son. His father called Pete regularly, asked how he was doing, offered to help him if he needed it, sent gifts and money orders for his birthdays. But everyone realized that if his father disappeared from Pete's life, his son would not even remember him. Alfred lived his life wishing that summer would come sooner. He couldn't wait for his father to come and get him. To his mother's great jealousy, Alfred became friends with Natasha, a tan girl with flaxen hair, who sang so well to the guitar, raced with him to swim to the buoys, came to the delight of finding an archaeological rarity. In short, she was cheerful, beautiful, funny. And it was so easy with her, not like with his mother. They got on very well together. Alfred invariably stretched out over the summer and came back all grown up, as his mother used to say. But he had the delicacy to say almost nothing about his summer vacation, except that everything was great, his father was doing fine. And they were both looking forward to seeing each other again next summer. Alfred did not follow his father's advice, and after high school he went to university, dreaming of becoming an archaeologist. He belonged to those rare students who study with true passion. He not only wrote scientific papers, but also maintained contacts with scientists working in the fields he was interested in. He took extra English lessons to read articles in foreign journals. He worked part-time so that in summer he could travel to those antiquities that he dreamed about during long winter nights. He was ready to work at the blackest jobs, not even to sift the earth, but to cook dinner for those who sifted, just to be at the excavations, just to be involved in all this. At one time he was completely mesmerized by Egypt. He returned from there black with tan, from morning to night recounting legends, theories, hypotheses, his eyes burning with excitement. Even Pete, who was also obsessed with his chemistry, thought his little brother a little crazy. Isabella had only seen Alfred a couple times in her life. He had come to her in Paul's wedding and seemed very young, 17 years old. Although at that time he had already graduated from university, and was working somewhere in Asia Minor. They rented a large hall in a restaurant. There was dancing, and there was a smoking room. And so gradually, all the young people piled into this smoking room, although no one had brought even a vape with them. Alfred was just telling about the finds they found underwater, about how he almost died in a collapse in the underground labyrinths, about the treasure he never managed to find, though it seemed to be about to happen ... And the clue, where the ancient treasures were hidden, here it was. It was necessary to look at this spectacle from the outside. A company was sitting, listening with the keenest attention, and one could guess that it was a wedding only by the fact that one of the girls was in a white dress and had a veil on her head. Then Alfred came to visit them once on a passing visit, and yes, he was already working in India then. He had a PhD under his belt and was writing his doctorate. But if Pete was a real PhD, so easy to imagine in an auditorium lecturing, Alfred still seemed too young. More of a traveler than a scientist. A man who knows how to pitch a tent, cook food on a fire, hunt wild animals, who readily embarks on various adventures. But what does this have to do with scientific works? Pardon me. Isabella suddenly remembered that Pete and her brother had been talking about poisons. And Pete suddenly began to say that these days to get rid of an undesirable person, hired hitman, just stupid. And even if you organize an accident, the risk is too great. Even more foolish to take the simplest poison, which is easy to detect. Complex formulations are another matter. True, the price for the right portion can reach up to $500,000. But the result is guaranteed, and there is practically no risk that during the investigation they will find you. Alfred listened to his brother, seemingly with curiosity. He had come to their house by chance, just passing through. At first he didn't even want to bother them. He arrived late in the evening and thought he would stay at the station until morning. But he was too tired, and there was not a single free seat in the waiting room. He could only sit against the wall somewhere, and he dreamed of a hot bath, a hearty supper, and a soft bed. "Of course, come," said Pete. "I'll meet you at the terminus." They got Alfred into the bath, but they didn't have time to feed him. He fell asleep on the couch. All they had to do was put a blanket over him and turn out the lights. But they all woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning for some reason. Isabella had to go to work at 8:30. Alfred was leaving for the capital in the morning, and the brothers treasured the opportunity to talk at least a little. That's when they had a crazy breakfast with scrambled eggs, fried sausage and vodka, and a conversation that jumped from topic to topic until it came to poisons. "You know, I was fascinated by the Count of Monte Cristo at one time," said Alfred. "Remember, I can even quote from it to you. Go outside France, go to Aleppo, to Cairo, or at least to Naples or Rome, and you will meet on the street slender people with fresh, rosy complexion, about whom the demon, you encounter him casually, could say to you, 'This gentleman has been poisoned for 3 weeks, and in a month will be a cold corpse.'"
And you know, in the East I've found that to be true. I've heard too much on the subject and I've seen some things with my own eyes. All right, you are a chemist, but I also involuntarily worked on antidotes there and gained some knowledge in toxicology. I'll tell you about it when I have time.
But after that, the brothers never met. Remembering these words of Alfred, Isabella stopped like a dumbfounded. How could this village girl know about the casual infatuation of a man she had never seen in her life? Once, when Isabella had gotten a job and was asking her colleagues for advice, the elderly Laurel had told her, "Baby, a community doctor is like a housewife. Can a housewife do all the work? No, there's always something else to do. That's the way it is with us. You'll absolutely always have something to do, and there's no end to it." Isabella remembered these words more than once when she took over the household. No matter how much she valued every corner of her safe haven, but still her hands did not reach as often as she would like to iron the laundry, sew new curtains. Isabella sadly recalled that once, it seems, at school, she liked to embroider beads. In the institute, it was not so much to do. But now she stood at the ironing board. The physical work brought her thoughts to order. Pete was at home, as always, and on the computer. Isabella sometimes thought that if her husband had a computer chair made of stone, it would eventually develop a dent in its shape. Pete hardly ever got up from his desk. Isabella herself didn't suspect the trickery behind it. Normally with her husband she spoke in no uncertain terms. But since only recently he had said with irritation that he had no connection with any girls, she had taken a detour.
"I had a patient today named Anastasia," she said casually.
The iron was sliding on the sheet, But Isabella kept her eyes on her husband, and she managed to catch that tiny 2-second pause, that change in tone, as if the note had been falsified. "Is that from the operetta?" Pete asked. "There is such an opera," said Isabella, "and the girl is heavy. I haven't had a case like this in a long time. I remember earlier we used to drink acid, poisoned on the grounds of love. They bring such a fool, and until morning you try to get her out. Everything inside is burned. But it's not like that." There's another hiccup. Pete started writing something by hand, or maybe he was just scribbling in a notebook. "It's okay, you'll be fine," he finally said, "although, what am I? It's not your thing. It's for the hospital." No, Isabella's voice was impassive. She put aside the folded sheet and put a pillowcase on the board. "There, and our hospital will not be able to afford it. You can't understand there, either neurology or something else. So we sent her to NSK. Let them sort it out. And if anything, you won't have to account for mortality." Pete looked at his wife. "That's good." "I don't know about mortality." Isabella realized at that moment that she couldn't give up, that she would have to keep digging, even against her will. "You know I'm not a bad diagnostician, but here, it's a complete mystery. Although, yeah, I don't think she's gonna make it. I called the regional hospital, by the way, and I found out." She stopped talking. And that was Isabella's moment of truth. If Pete was involved, he couldn't help but ask. She looked at him even eagerly. "And what?" His question was short, but Isabella knew Pete too well to realize there was no indifference. She flinched as if she'd been hit, her hand crumpling the edge of the pillowcase. "The girl's in a coma," Isabella said. "I'm going to find out her fate. A very unusual case." "Interesting. What was she to do, Lord? My God, ... She had not an hour to spare, and she could not in her wildest dreams imagine herself as a detective who would go to a remote village and look for those who could tell her something. Some rams. Isabella, who usually had not had enough nights she slept as if she were falling into an abyss, and in the mornings begged fate for a chance to sleep a little longer, now went to the kitchen, dropped a sedative into a cup. After a while made sure that the dose did not take her and went for a new portion. In the morning she got up with a heavy head and called her sister. "We need to talk. Can I come to your place?" "I'd rather come to your place," Izzy said. "I'm sorry. Those dog people love me. I'm afraid to open the door. I'm like a fortress at home. You and I look alike, by the way, so you could be mistaken for me on the way over and get green on you or something. I'll be there tonight when I get a chance." And she did come, sitting at the table, so beautiful. Even a relative will admire. A sultry brunette in a white dress with open shoulders. Inge didn't care where she wore such outfits to visit her sister, to work, or to the theater. She felt lousy when she didn't look stunning. But now Izzy forgot her usual habits now and then to correct her hair with a graceful movement, to wiggle her shoulders. She was impressed with the story. "Ask yours, he should know," Isabella asked. "Any detectives? Agency or just a private? ... Not very expensive, if possible. It's just a lot of work to go and talk, and then tell me. Just make sure the detective doesn't talk too much. Otherwise he'll blackmail me, saying I'll tell your husband that you hired me to watch him. Izzy, I don't trust anyone anymore." "I understand," said the sister. "I'm willing to pay the extra. It's a real detective story." "I hate detectives," said Isabella with force, "and I didn't want to be in any of them. But if you can help me out, I rarely ask you for anything." Her sister called the same evening. "Izzy," said Izzy began, "there are some guys, private contractors. They're probably the best professionals. We don't get along well with them, but it's different for you. You can turn to them. Write down the phone number. Don't tell them it's from me, okay? You have a different last name. You're not going to get caught. What's your beef?" My Stephen wanted to shut them down, take away the license and everything. They're pretty young guys, but they're heirs to those truth-tellers from the 90s. They've been known to go where they shouldn't. And I also had a problem with the dog of this Andre, who was their chief. He was in the army with her. So in a word, it got to us. And the dog is big, serious, and so that there were no problems. He could chew others, well, in a word. "I understand," said Isabella. "Anyway, give me someone else. Another agency. These will help me so much that it would be better to someone else to harm." You write down the phone number. Stephen didn't recommend anyone else. If they say no, then we'll think about it. And their rates are quite human. Isabella managed to arrange an appointment surprisingly quickly. The next day she was working the second shift again, and she knew from experience that it would be impossible to leave at a minute's notice. Something was bound to delay her. At 9 o'clock in the evening will be released, the fastest. Nevertheless, the detective agency agreed to wait for her, although by this time the guy should have closed long ago. Fortunately, it was not far to get there, on the outskirts of one of the central streets. It was an ordinary apartment on the first floor, converted into an office. The guy who welcomed her, he was a little younger than Isabella, very tall, and even when he sat down at his desk again, you could see that he was tall. And he was also kind of frowning, very, very serious. Isabella thought that if her sister were here, and there were no black cat or dog between her and Alex, Izzy would try to flirt with him. She was always flirtatious with all men, but she was just as sure to be a complete failure. It was hard to imagine a man less inclined to flirt. Isabella had to tell about what had happened so long and in detail, as if she was at the appointment with a psychologist who wants to get out of her everything that can be, to unravel the soul to the bottom. "We'll go there tomorrow," Alex finally said, "with my assistant. In the evening we'll have the first results. Do you want to contact us by phone or in person? Our rate's there, a piece of paper under the glass. 50% down payment. But what are the first results?" Isabella was confused. "I only once. To ask you. I wanted you to find this Rams and talk to him. That's all." "I have little doubt that the thread will go on," Alex said. "Or are you not interested in finding out the whole story?"
Why not? Depending on what happened there, Isabella remembered the words of her sister, who said that she was ready to help with the money. "Your prices are normal. Can I use a card? I'm assuming that my husband is a decent man. Except that he might have gotten into trouble by accident, but of course there's no crime on his part."
"You can pay by card." Alex nodded, making it clear that nothing more was required from Isabella. The woman again felt guilty for delaying the detective. He should have been home long ago. But suddenly he asked, "She is not a relative of yours?" Isabella remained silent. She couldn't deny it. And she braced herself for the possibility that she was about to be shown the door. "You just look alike," Alex said. "Sisters? Your sister's a real bitch."
"Let's keep it in line," Isabella asked.
Alex nodded again, agreeing and letting her go at the same time, and pushed some papers to himself. Apparently, he wasn't going home for a while. "This is quite a place," Margot said when Margot stopped.
Alex had called her in this morning and told her it would take all day. Margot was a girl, and it was as if she had put her hair in 2 ponytails on purpose, emphasizing her appearance as a schoolgirl of yesterday. Margot often became talkative with those who were not in a hurry to open their souls to Alex.
The girl had never been to this village before. "How do people live here?" "Well, big Boston's not so bad. There's even a 3-window hospital. But here is a dirt road and even well overgrown with grass. You can see that when Margot comes here, it's a big deal. It's a good thing if there's a delivery truck bringing groceries to the old folks. 'Cause who's gonna live here but old people? It's not even the middle of nowhere. It's a complete bare corner. No, it's probably beautiful in summer when all these meadows are in bloom. But in winter, how do you get here? By tractor? Snowmobile? Certainly not by bus. There are about a dozen or 2 houses here, and you can't see any people on the street. Look over there," Alex pointed. Margot looked and saw the dome of the church. The church was small, but relatively new, and the bright blue dome had been painted recently. This place had been lovingly cared for in its day, only it was all gone. The flower beds with late autumn flowers were overgrown with weeds. Leaves were lying on the paths.
"Look at the well," Alex said.
Margot didn't understand the well was by the church. So what? "That's why the place is so abandoned," Alex explained. "There is no stream or lake nearby. Dacha dwellers don't like it. The water is very deep. To dig a well is either a lot of money or a feat. This well is one of those feats." "What are we looking for now?" Margot wanted to get out and stretch her legs. She even got carsick on the off-road, this rehab center that's a Katia, or Anastasia's family. But actually, we were sent to pick up some Raikala.
There's a woman going to the well. Talk to her.
Yeah, Margot hung the camera on her shoulder, stepped out of Margot's room, and adjusted her belt on her shoulder. "Hello," she said, knowing that they would answer her it is customary in the village to greet both strangers and neighbors. "What a beautiful church you have. We got a little lost here. We came to Big Boston, resting, taking pictures of all kinds of beautiful things. We wanted to go inside the church, but it was locked. It's only open for services?" "It won't open for services for a while now," said the woman, and began to draw water. She was about 50 years old. Her bologna jacket was darned on the sleeve. "As father died, who will come here after him? To such a far. Maybe they'll send someone to serve at Easter. Otherwise our grandmothers can't get far. They'll be left without a feast at all. Father John, he was special. He asked to come here himself. And who would allow him to build a church here? For a backwoods like ours, a house of worship would be enough. The farther away from the city, from people, the closer to God," he said. "He became a priest in his old age. He sold his house, gave his pension. His nephews helped him, and so we built a church. When everything was coming to completion, then he joined in with money."
How long ago did your priest die? From what? The naive Margot didn't even bat her eyes.
"Do men in Russia live long? Ours had a quarrel with his disciple. That's what brought him down. That one, the devil knows what the former altar boy is now either a sectarian or a schismatic. But he's cunning. At first he walked around with his eyes downcast, his face as gentle as a girl's. And then he clung to Father Ion's prediction." "A prediction? Oh, it's all a long story, and painful. I don't want to remember." The woman wrinkled her nose. "I wanted to live in my parents' house. But if I leave here, it's because here, in this center, to this very assistant, who before almost rustled his wings himself. Nowadays such faces from Saint are coming. Here not only in the dark, here in broad daylight it's scary to go out in the street." "Really? I was going to go visit a girl I know. She gave me the address, but I don't remember where I put the piece of paper." The woman's face immediately shut down, became cold. "It's better not to go near her now. She's almost a queen to that jerk." Apparently the woman didn't know that Anastasia was now lying in the intensive care unit of the regional hospital. "It's a pity," Margot said, upset. "We don't really know each other that well. We crossed paths in the city by chance. Anastasia was interested in a souvenir. I brought it. I knew I'd be here, so I brought it with me. Maybe someone close to her could give it to her. Does she have family here?" "Her mother's here," said the woman. "She's okay, maybe just a little crazy. You probably heard about the ostrich farm they want to start here? That's her. Her idea ... What's really?"
The woman was distracted, put the bucket of water back, and even laughed.
"We have chickens here God forbid to feed. You see what a lonely place we live in. How to get fodder here. To drag bags of mixed fodder for 3 faraway lands. And these geisels, ostriches. They've got the brains of a chicken, maybe even less. But they've got the strength of a chicken. I thought Abigail wanted tourists to come here. To see the birds, maybe even ride them. Oh, I can't. We've already been ridiculed by the boys. Transportation here in the village is mostly bicycles. The kids were laughing that the ostrich will not look for where to park, as will give with a swing of his paw to clear the parking lot. Abigail also wanted to sell eggs, because there's an egg. Oh, what an egg that could feed 10 people. But who'd buy them here at that price? They are not 3 pennies will cost ... Everything should justify itself. With one girl from the city, Abigail agreed, but she took eggs from her. The woman lowered her voice, for dead children, so. Margot's mouth dropped open, as if she'd been told a horror story.
For what children? For the dead.
They said she was a photographer, but a special one ... If a woman loses a baby in a maternity hospital ... To premature baby, or something ... So, to keep the memory alive, the girl made beautiful photos. She would put the little one in the shell of ostrich eggs. Such a creature of God born into the world. So this girl came and took it, and then those. From the sect, they are hungry there all the time, on grits and cabbage, so they dragged these ostriches and killed one after another. Margot shook her head, but the woman was already pointing at her. You'll go down that alley to our second street, Victory Street, and there's a brown wooden house with blue shutters and a white brick one next to it. Abigail lives in the brown one. Let's go, Margot said, getting in. You're right, it's not that simple. And I guess it's not easy to find out who Anastasia was meeting with. Although they had the brown house and white house next to it directions, they had to look. The street was long and apparently once noisy, but now almost all the houses were abandoned. And when they found the right one, Alex went with Margot because she could not unlock the gate, and then she was afraid to go further in case there was a dog here and it would attack. The door was unlocked, half-dark hay with a sloping floor, some ancient cupboard, strange and unfamiliar odors. "May I?" Margot shouted and asked Andrei quietly, "What if Anastasia's mother is in the hospital? Then why didn't she lock the door? If the daughter is in such a state, you can forget about the door." But footsteps were heard, and a tall, stout woman stood on the threshold. "It's about Anastasia," Margot began. She didn't know if the woman would want to talk to them at all, but at the mention of her daughter, she saw such fear in her mother's eyes that she realized she and Alex wouldn't be thrown out. "Is she alive?" Abigail asked. "I called in the morning ... They allow it from 9 to 10 ... and in the evening ... Why are you here? Is she dead?" No, Margot rushed over. "We want to help." "Tell." The house seemed small from the outside, but inside it was spacious. Abigail led them into a large room, bright with 3 windows on each wall. There was a stove on one wall, and it warmed 2 tiny rooms. They could only lie in bed or stand next to it, and instead of doors there were bright curtains. The house was very clean and very simple, and where would there be room for conspiracies, mysticism and intrigue? "Pete has a brother," the girl finally said. "He understands these things." Abigail took pictures of the scrolls, and Pete sent them to his brother. And he, in general, in a precipitate, and says it's all true. There was such a monk, it is known, that what he predicted always and always came true. And it means that such things will really come to the world. Anyway, he managed to scare a grown man. Pete came to Abigail and told her to get rid of. "Your family," they say, "do not get used to it. Put it in a shell, make a beautiful photo, and that's it. You will live in peace. Everyone will leave you alone." But Abigail, no way. Then Pete secretly and began to learn from his brother about poisons. Like recipes. He had to have one, so that then no one would think on him. "Components," he said, "name them, and I'll make it all myself. I'm a chemist." My brother would never have given it to a living person. Pete said so he needed it for his work. Alex began to whistle softly. Margot knew that it happened to him only in moments of extreme excitement. "So, we have to find out the recipe and get in touch with our brother," Margot summarized. It hadn't occurred to both of them that they didn't have to do that at all. Their task was to inform the customer about the connection between her husband and a girl from a remote village, and then to get a fee and forget about the case. But they always forgot about those boundaries. "Listen, you haven't told us everything." Alex sat down in front of Raquel and looked her straight in the eyes. Even Margot looked surprised. "What else do we need to find out?" "Tell me more about yourself," Alex asked, his voice calm. Margot knew that tone well. It was called "Don't Spook the Other Person." "Are you sure you're from Abigail?" she asked. They didn't need to be told. They were here on Isabella's orders. "We're here to help Abigail," Margot said. "What's your connection to this family?" Alex asked. There was another pause, another silence. "Mary brought me here," the girl said. "I'm a homeless gypsy. And the name, Ramslea, is not uncommon for us, but for you, it's a rarity. I used to live in this center too, at Marina's time, in the former club. There's a small room where the accountant used to sit, and then I got scared. When Mary left and this guy came, it was as if everyone was going crazy. That's when I joined Abigail, and the prediction." "What?" "It wasn't Abigail who had to give birth to that child," Raquel said. "It was me. I was on that Samantha when I was a baby. I got really sick, and they told me I was clinically dead, and I can see into the future a little bit too. Maybe it's just gypsy blood." Raquel licked her lips. "And my father told me, only me, that it was about a girl from the gypsy tribe. He dreamed about me several times in a row, so it wasn't just a dream. he saw me, with a child in my arms, and black wings all round. But how Margot took her head in her hands, what I can't figure out is how Abigail knew about this ID. Did he bring it to her and say, "Here, darling, let's get this over with. Have a drink in front of me, please"? Well, that couldn't have happened. Who in their right mind? Apparently, no one was sane, Alex said quietly. They were drinking wine. Abigail had never drunk wine before, and here he brought it. He said, "Okay, you want to do it your way, so be it. Let's do it for that." After that, he never came back. And she started having these attacks. Every night, dizzy, cold sweats. Abigail called him, and he said that nothing could help her, not even a doctor, that it was all slow and left no trace. And the secret of this Ida knows only his brother. That's when Abigail finished sadly. That's when I told her that she had nothing to do with it, that the prediction was about me ... and she hugged me and told me not to tell anyone. Because all those angry men were around ... and there was no one to stand up for me ... and I'd be worse off than she was. And she decided to go to town. "Wait, I'll get myself a drink," Isabella said. She took a bottle of expensive cognac out of the cupboard. Patients were always giving her gifts, chocolates, boxes of chocolates, and for some reason only cognac. But no one in the family drank, and Isabella forgot about these bottles for years. But now it was their turn. She never thought that she would be able to drink a cup of fiery drink in sips, like water, and cough only at the end.
Someone's going to tell me. Will tell me. All of it. All of it. She wanted to scream. I don't want to feel stupid. I'm trying to understand. What are you all afraid of? You're all afraid of this girl. She's not going to make it. I can't imagine her being alive in that condition.
I strictly told him not to even think about it, Alfred said. It's all nonsense, come on. What kind of specialist am I ... toxicologist? Funny. I was interested in it a long time ago because, well, you've heard probably in ancient tombs different curses of pharaohs, priests, gods, radiation, spores, poisoned air. I read a lot, learned about it. And then historical figures died from different reasons. And poisons. It was a whole science, how to send them to the other world. But here in the East, it's not only a science, it's an art. And I have, let's say, acquaintances. But when Pete asked, of course there was one question, why? Not as a medicine. He has you near him. He will get everything he needs, you and him, a doctor and a chemist. Why does he need all these substances that you don't have in your country? And that's when I found out about this girl. Isabella, I'm not going to tell you all this. He found a reason why she shouldn't be on Samantha, shall we say. But I sent him away. 2 weeks later, he called again. He was talking about an experiment he needed to do in his lab. I didn't believe him, so he swore on his parents' memory that it wasn't to. Get this. He remembered his father and mother. How could I not believe him? I could say no. But if you know about Anastasia, which you were never supposed to know about. So she's still alive?
She was this morning. Isabella poured herself another half cup. I called. So she didn't lie to me. And what? Do we not know this very substance?
No, there was no hesitation in Alfred's voice. And there is no salvation for her. Alfred's look seemed almost hopeless to Isabella. There are several components. There may be different compositions ... How do I know what he mixed in there ... in what doses? Can you imagine Pete answering those questions? Isabella shook her head. Of course not. She knew her husband's character. He'd deny everything. I don't know. If she were even here, Alfred said, this girl. There are masters here, of a special kind. You don't have to say anything to them. They will take a man by the hand and by the pulse, by some signs that they alone know. They will understand what is the matter and what kind of antidote to give. But where can they get them from you? They were silent. I've seen her, Anastasia, Alfred went on. Pete sent me a picture of her. She was a nice country girl, 100 years old. Why don't you let me ... That's right. I won't be the one to praise her ... It wasn't so easy for me when I found out. I'm sorry. He paused again, but what to do? I'll call Pete today. I'll try to find out. But if it doesn't work, it's imagine. It's like a mine inside a man set for a certain time. And as long as he's given, he can't last any longer. And the time goes on. When did she come to see you? Anastasia. Isabella drew her eyebrows together as she recalled the day. Alfred only shook his head.
It already seems to be going on the clock here.
I call there every morning. She's still alive. Alfred was silent, but Isabella knew full well what that meant. Let me talk to him, Alex suggested. He himself suggested Isabella to meet him not in the office, but in a small coffee shop in the basement. There was almost no choice here, pies, buns, that's all. But the coffee was excellent. The pot was heating on the hot sand. The drink was thick and strong, and my heart began to beat somewhere in my throat. Maybe it's the news, Isabella thought. Alex told her what he and Margot had learned, and Isabella transferred the rest of the money for the job to his card. Now she knew everything, but it didn't make her feel any better. On the contrary, it made it hard to breathe. How will you talk to him? She asked bitterly, man to man. Shake him and ... slam his forehead against a wall somewhere in the entrance. My father was an investigator, Alex said. I know how to get an answer. I'll call you, Isabella said and stood up. Her half-drunk coffee was left on the table. An untouched pie. She walked away a little hunched over, hands shoved in her pockets, and Alex thought he hadn't seen someone so lonely in a long time. Isabella went up the stairs, thinking that she could not avoid talking to her husband, and what words to find and what to do then.
Pete should be home by now at this hour, but Isabella unlocked the door into the darkness. She turned on the light, looked around the room. She saw a clean desk, no papers, just a few sheets on the floor. After that, she didn't even need to open the closet to see if her husband's things were there.
He'd done the same thing here. He'd left Ida not a crumb of hope, not a single word for her, Isabella. Isabella sank down on the couch. Without realizing what she was doing, she ran her hands through her hair and mussed the strands. She laughed and realized she had to hold back that strange laughter because it was followed by sobs. A real hysteria, classic. She was tormented by a fierce resentment, not even at Pete, at fate. Why? Why? Had she ever done anything evil in her life? Days and nights in the hospital ... So little had been given to her, and so much had been taken away ... She would never have children, never. Pete took a huge chunk of her life ... And what's left? Nothing. Not even a note ... An empty house. Walls. She couldn't bear to breathe the air he had breathed before. Isabella jumped up, crossed the room in 2 steps, opened not even the window but the balcony door. She could have stepped off the balcony, and if she had lived on the 16th floor, the dizzying height would probably have pulled her and she would have stepped into the void. But the 3rd floor ... Stupid ... Lying in the hospital later as an invalid. Who will take care of her? Who needs her? Who needs her in general, Samantha? Isabella left her phone number at the emergency room of the regional hospital. Asked them to call her if ... Though she wasn't sure if they'd remember her there. Who is she to Ida? Not even her old doctor. Just a random consultant. They only call relatives. Anastasia has a mother. Isabella didn't sleep at night, couldn't, and she dialed the emergency room at dawn. The person on duty might be angry, but he would answer. It's gotten worse, she heard. Today. Isabella asked with only her lips, but the doctor on duty heard. Still struggling. What more can I say? He hung up. Isabella called Alfred. I have a plane at 10, he said. I'm coming to see you. I've got something, but did you find out what he gave her? Pete was in the attic. It was one of the oldest houses in the city, one that the authorities had long been clamoring to tear down, but it was very nice, gray stone with bay windows. Somebody wanted to put a typical high-rise tower on the spot, but the house was still standing. Pete had learned this way to the attic when he was a boy, and he could get in, even if the door was locked. All he had to do was pull back one of the boards. He used to come here to sit when he was feeling down. A sharp sense of loneliness accompanied him most of the time. Mom loved him, he knew that. But Mom was almost always so busy, and Pete himself had no friends, only books. Him and science, alone with each other. Pete knew that not a shadow of charm was inherent in him. He didn't know how to speak so that he would be listened to. He knew a lot, but the guys were always bored with him, and the girls even more so, overly serious. He didn't want to stay at home when it came to him. Someone could always make it even more painful with careless questions and remarks. When he found this place, he would sit here for a long time, among old things. For some reason, he found comfort in seeing it all: stacks of yellowed newspapers and magazines, broken chairs, a cracked mirror. It was all in the past, and his pain would pass too. Then, when he left for the institute, he had Olesya, a girl from a large, almost marginal family, who was ready to go to hell bald, just to stay home less. She almost never left Pete's dormitory, and even the janitor was so used to her that she missed her, even though she wore a scornful expression on her face. And Pete's roommate got used to it, too, that they were practically a threesome. Caustic tried to return to the room later, when the guys were already asleep. And in the morning, Olesya prepared breakfast for everyone: sandwiches with cheap cheese spread, instant coffee. When she got pregnant, Pete was scared. He knew his mother would be dead, but she wouldn't let him get married. What else will have to listen to? Pete forever remembered this scene. He, as a sissy young lady, breaks her fingers, repeating what to do, what to do. Dumb razor-sharp stare, her grin. She packed up and left. She didn't come home, stayed with some of her friends. Then when she had Vincent, she got a job as a sales clerk. Pete never forgot her. When he started to earn money, as a thank you for not giving him away, for helping to hide everything, he began to slip her money from time to time. And even later, she could call him if she needed help, just so Isabella wouldn't find out. He'd met Ina in the hospital when he'd been laid up with a stomach ulcer. Typical of neurotics. Isabella closed his ulcer in a week. At the time, he was already a PhD, a promising young scientist, and they began the Ramsen he'd probably dreamed of all his life. A beautiful young woman, well-mannered, a doctor. Pete's mother did not just accept her daughter-in-law, she was in love with her. His mother never had time to learn that there would be no children in the marriage. And then, when Vincent got hooked on narcotics, and Olesya begged to save him somehow, and it all began, which destroyed Pete's marriage, his whole life. He knew there would be no more life with Ina. Stepping through the window, as she had wanted to do, he wasn't going to do. Couldn't cut his life short. But to leave, buy a ticket, get on the train, and somewhere out there in a new place, Pete didn't even know where yet, to start all over again. And here, after all, there was the risk of being locked up. Pete shook his head and stood up. They wouldn't wait. If he had anything left in this life, it was the institute, his job. No one would be able to prove the presence of that idea in his system. Especially those illiterate village women, they won't bother with the court. After Anastasia's funeral, they won't have time for that. Pete had another secret from Isabella. He'd bought a one-room apartment in his own name. In his own name, but it was meant for Vincent in the future. Compensation for a fatherless childhood. Well, Pete will be living in the apartment for the time being. An older, skinny man climbed out of the attic like a schoolboy who doesn't want to be seen. They wouldn't let Alfred on the plane because he smelled too much of alcohol. "You're drunk," the stewardess told him later. "Girl, look at me again," he asked. "Unfortunately, I am completely sober." His voice was sad, and his eyes did not float, not misty, as in a man who had had too much alcohol. Although, of course, it's twofold. Alfred was really drunk, but he knew that the booze would take him to the point where maybe he could take a nap during the flight. No more. And who would pay attention to that blackened ivory ring on his ring finger? A souvenir, that's all. Alfred did doze off, a shallow, superficial sleep, but even such rest was necessary. In recent days, the excavations were so interesting that he forgot about everything, slept intermittently, a couple of hours a day, no more. Scribed, compared with books, and trembled with excitement as a man whose dream there it is, 2 steps away. It is only necessary to stretch out your hand. But then Isabella called ... and Alfred realized that he was the murderer. He couldn't put himself to sleep with stories about the experiments Pete supposedly needed. Alfred had given everything he had earned in 2 years for the ring, or rather its contents. But it might not have helped. The phone in his pocket would vibrate, and Isabella would say, "Too late," or he'd hear it when he arrived. The stewardess would lean over him, offer him something to eat. She, too, had a strange feeling for this man, a look in his eyes that told her he was in trouble, going to a funeral. Mineral water? Coffee? Alfred only shook his head. He wanted to sink into oblivion for a while longer. Isabella met him at the airport. She looked very bad. She had the same tortured look in her eyes as he did. "Did you bring what you promised?" she asked as they walked toward Margot's. "Bring what I don't know what ... How could I promise if I'm not sure what it is? I'm more worried about the other thing, how. Can you imagine that we go to the intensive care unit and say, give, please, this patient, the medicine from one Indian crook ... Because there is such a type, Inca. You should have seen his face. Anyway, you won't cure the girl, so at least she won't suffer. Anyway, how do we get there?" "Through my sister," Isabella explained briefly, or rather, through her husband. "He's got a goodwill everywhere. You and I will pass in white coats, and there is a girl." Alfred had never imagined that the regional hospital could be reached so quickly. Isabella threw off her jacket, a white coat underneath. She took another one out of the bag and handed it to Alfred. "Put it on." They entered the largest, multi-purpose building without any problems. Isabella, apparently having been here before, led the way confidently, some side staircase narrow for the medics. They rode up it quickly on horseback to the top floor. A very young girl was waiting for them on the landing, also in a robe, but not even a nurse, it seemed. Her kerchief was bunched up in her dark hair, a nurse. Isabella made a sign to her, took out her phone, dialed a number. The door was open for them. "Come in." It was definitely a nurse by now, just not for long, please. "It's with us." Isabella nodded at the girl. "She works on the 8th floor. That's the niece." The nurse frowned, hesitated. "Okay, let's hurry up." Alfred knew, according to the legend, they were Anastasia's relatives, come to say goodbye, because this morning it was finally clear that there was no hope. Even so, no outsiders are allowed into the intensive care unit. But Inga's husband called, and for them they made an exception. They are colleagues, medical professionals. They won't make hysterics. "I need water." "In a glass." "Just a little, at the bottom." While they were walking, Alfred managed to say it quietly to Isabella. "We'll think of something," she replied faintly.
The nurse led them into the sanctum sanctorum, to the bed where Anastasia lay.
"She can't hear you anyway. 2 minutes, okay?" There was nothing left of the sturdy, seemingly healthy girl Isabella had first seen. It was as if Anastasia had already died. The gray, even blue face, the pointed features. Of course she couldn't hear them. But the instrument still showed she was alive. "Can I?" Isabella took hold of her throat. "Water." "A little bit. I don't feel well at all." Of course the nurse wanted to take her away, but Isabella signaled for her to bring water. In a few seconds the nurse returned with a glass. Isabella drank, and with her eyes she asked Alfred how much to leave. And when there was almost enough left, he made a sign. She handed him the glass and said, "Hold it." She turned to the nurse. "I wanted to ask you 2 simple questions. If possible, not here, in the corridor, in case she can hear us." Alfred and Raquel realized they only had a few seconds. Alfred pressed some secret spring and the ring opened. The gray powder melted into the water without a trace. It became clear again. But how will she drink it? I mean, she probably can't swallow. Abigail Raquel put her arms around her friend's neck, lifting her head. Come on, quickly. Come on, Abigail." How did that girl do it? But a moment later she showed Alfred the empty glass.
"That's it," said the young man. "There's nothing more we can do."
They walked out into the corridor. Raquel paused for a moment to look at her friend once more. Isabella was crying and saying to the nurse and the doctor who approached her, "You did everything right, ... everything ... The relatives will have no claims." She was crying sincerely. The nervous tension was too great. They drove home in silence. Raquel stayed at the hospital. She said she would wait with Anastasia's mother. The end was definitely expected today, and it was not even thought that the sick woman would live through the night. It was a mournful place. A small corridor at the entrance to the intensive care unit. There were 2 doctors' offices here, and in general relatives had nothing to do here. They were not allowed into the ward anyway. But at least they weren't chased away, and it seemed to the relatives that they somehow, with their strength, their energy, supported those who were just feet away from them, fighting for every breath. Abigail sat there insane, swollen, unable to think straight from her tears. She'd been told it would all be over soon, and every time the door to the ward opened, she waited for the news. But the doctors went about their day. They went in and out, discussing things among themselves, but Anna was never told anything. She didn't notice that Raykal was huddled next to her, waiting too.
It wasn't until almost evening that a young Dr. Abigail knew came out of the ward. He was supposed to be on duty tonight, and he noticed the woman, spoke to her in a very different tone of voice, not as annoyed or sad as the other medics had spoken to her. This one had a lighter tone.
"Well done, your Anastasia. Right out of breath, I wonder if it's going to be another night like this." Raquel shuddered in a way that Abigail could feel. The doctor's words didn't reach the mother herself. The next day, Anastasia opened her eyes. She couldn't see well enough to distinguish between light and darkness and objects in outlines. When the doctor spoke to her, she raised and lowered her eyelids as a sign that she could hear them. Alex was on his way to Thoctist's. This time there was no question of taking Margot with him. There was no way he was taking her. Alex had arranged the meeting in advance, over the phone. On the other end, he heard a young but authoritative voice. Vincent was used to being obeyed unconditionally. At first he wanted to refuse to let Alex see him. "Then I'll put your father in jail," Alex said. "The girl's alive. I'll bring up every chemistry lab in the country, but I'll have proof. And you'll have absolutely no cover at all. And then the village council will suddenly decide they want the house. And you'll have to move out with all your zombies. Wouldn't it be better to talk? Aren't you afraid that something bad might happen to you too?" The voice asked mockingly, and after a pause Theoctist added, "All right, come, let's talk." Only now Alex realized what bandit faces Raykal was talking about. The man who was chopping wood near the house would not be allowed to meet in the dark, somewhere in an empty place. No, the man might have been harmless. But the sight of this creature, with half his face hidden by unkempt vegetation and a beastly glint in his eyes, would give any sensitive homeowner a heart attack. Alex, on the other hand, did not care. But he had brought his weapon with him to this meeting. He was led through a large room, where there were 2 rows of bunks and the smell of unwashed bodies, into a small room, something like a study. It even looked wild in here. At a desk in front of an open notebook sat a young man in a black cassock, with a face as delicate as a girl's, with fine features. Yes, he looked like Pete. "Have a seat," Thoctist said quite friendly, "but don't threaten me right away." Alex hadn't started to speak yet, but his interlocutor was already explaining to him. "You are quite aware of the case, aren't you? And you realize what's going to happen next. Anastasia will come back here. Where else would she go but back to her home, back to her mother? That's the baby she lost, right? What kind of baby would have survived? I mean, not even a baby, but but another one will be born We'll still take the girl back to US and no one will touch her here anymore. No one will hurt her You had an order. You started all this because of an order. Well, you've done your job. Now leave it at that. And as for my father," Thoctist shrugged, "do what you want with him. When I found out how he got involved in this case, I wanted him myself." "And if Anastasia doesn't come back here?" Alex asked. "Well, then her mom will suffer," explained Thoctist to him, as if he was not smart. "It's not only ostriches that can be sent to the other world. You can't imagine how many unpleasant accidents can be. For example, the bathhouse will catch fire, and from it the house. And in the house will be locked doors. That's what's sweet, little bastard." There was something like a smile on Andrei's face. "This family will not come to the village anymore. And if I only find out that you are looking for her, if something happens to Aaliyah or her mother, you will die slowly, somewhere in a cell, and everything will be over before any trial. Your only chance is to live from now on in such a way that you even breathe carefully, with a lookout." Alfred had been in town for a month. It had been a long time since he'd let himself be away for so long, but it was only a month before Anastasia was released from the hospital. Alfred had long since given the keys to his apartment to her mother. "You'll stay with me for now," he said. "Just pay the rent, and don't think about anything else." Alex said he'd put in an alarm system and everything. "You know you can't go back to the village. And if, of course, anyone bothers you, that's Alex's problem too." It was as if it had been tacitly agreed between them that Abigail would not thank him. Even if indirectly, he felt immensely guilty for her. He himself was staying with Isabella for the month. She might be the doctor, but she was the one to look after. Every day she went to work. Somehow she was there to see someone, to treat someone. But she'd come back completely exhausted, dropped her shoes in the hallway, wandered to her bed. She'd lie down with her face to the wall. She forgot to eat, forgot to even to wash her face. Alfred followed her like a little girl, until her sister, again through her connections, got and I'd Pierce Sands, which, though slowly, began to change the situation for the better. They were not attracted to each other, nor could there be even a shadow of Ramsen between them. There were two lonely people living in the apartment, but now Alfred saw that Isabella was at least becoming like herself. At the same time, he did not think she could ever again trust a man. "When you come to my shelter, you'll get your own dog," her sister told her. "You'll be able to walk with him, breathe fresh air. You're just a shadow now." Even Anastasia returned from the hospital more cheerful. The doctors didn't fully understand what had happened to her. They wrote complicated diagnoses, recommended regular checkups and registration, and not to ignore them. Little by little, Abigail said. Her daughter sat in the chair while her mother unzipped her boots. Abigail was afraid that if Anastasia bent over on her own, something would happen to her. "You'll get stronger, you'll learn something, you'll have a good, clean job, and you'll live like a human being. In the meantime, I'll earn." Raquel was earning too. She got a job in the hospital cafeteria as a dishwasher. Never tired, never complained. Brought home food in cans that no one else would eat. Neither Anastasia and her mother nor Raquel herself were spoiled. There is porridge, bread, tea, and that's enough. One day Alfred went to visit them and saw Raquel sitting on the stairs. The girl was smoking. She had a raincoat thrown over her shoulders. "Hey, aren't you cold?" Alfred asked. "No," said Raquel. "I used to run from house to house in winter in my dress in the village. I'm hardened." He sat down beside her. She put out her cigarette on the step. "Is something wrong?" Alfred asked. "Did you have a quarrel with them?" "I haven't quarreled with anyone. It's just, I'm all alone now." He understood at once. "I mean, it's my business, you know. And you were the one who said that everything could come true, that the monk was prescient. So now I can't escape my destiny, can I?" "How old are you?" Alfred asked. 18. "You look 14. Raquel shrugged. "All the hospital. They saw my papers when I applied for this job." "You know what?" Alfred said. "Let's get you a passport, and you can come with me." "What for?" she asked shortly and harshly. "We'll find someone there to talk to about it. A friend of mine was wondering recently. We worked there together. On his day off, he decided to go to see a spiritual teacher there. Mishka is into all this stuff. He knows English well. So he gets to a fork in the road. To the left is the way to a very famous tourist attraction. That's where everyone goes. Straight ahead into town. And to the right to that little village where Mishka wants to ask for directions and sees a shepherd, an ordinary, sunburned, old Indian man. And he has no time to ask him anything. He raises his hand and points him to the right. Is that how he knew where the man was going? How, Raquel? You will find there those who will tell you what to do. And by the way, your ancestors, the gypsies, came here just from India. For me, such a journey is like going to another planet, said Raquel. I have never been anywhere, and I have no money, and I am so afraid of starving. Her hands were calloused, but her fingers were long and thin. Alfred held them for a long time, trying to warm them. He felt them shudder in his hands, as if they were little chicks begging to be let out.